They came with nothing but a trunk, a Bible, and a hunger they couldn't shake. When German immigrants landed in Wisconsin in the 1850s, the forests were deep, the winters were cruel, and the nearest city felt a world away. They'd come not just for land, they escaped economic hardship, political upheaval, military conscription, and the failed revolutions in the German states. Yet somehow they turned hardship into flavor. Over open fires and cast iron pots they smoked pork shoulders, simmered sauerkraut, and baked dense rye bread that could outlast a snowstorm. These weren't just meals. They were survival stories written in butter, beer, and smoke. Every bite was a promise. We will make this land home. And what's wild, many of those recipes, the beer-boiled brats, cabbage rolls, potato dumplings, still live quietly in Wisconsin kitchens today. So stay to the end, because the 25 authentic foods you're about to see didn't just feed families. They helped build a state, one plate at a time. 1. Smoked pork shoulder with sauerkraut and boiled potatoes. If there was one smell that could make a log cabin in Wisconsin feel like home to a German immigrant, it was this. Smoked pork shoulder bubbling away with sauerkraut and a pot of potatoes steaming on the side. It wasn't just dinner, it was a connection to the homeland they'd left behind. In the 1850s, every bit of that pork mattered. Farmers cured the shoulders in salt, hung them in smokehouses built from pine, and let time do the rest. When winter hit, families pulled down those hams, boiled them with cabbage fermented in wooden barrels, and served it all with potatoes grown in the rocky Midwestern soil. The tang of sauerkraut cut through the richness of the meat, a balance only generations of frugal cooks could perfect. It was humble, hearty, and built for survival. Yet in that smoky aroma, there was something more. A reminder that even on a new continent, some comforts could still taste like home. 2. Bratwurst links with coarse rye bread and mustard. Long before bratwursts became tailgate kings at Lambeau Field, they were survival food for German settlers carving out a life in 1850s Wisconsin. Every village butcher had their own secret mix. Pork scraps, a little veal if times were good, salt, pepper, and nutmeg, all stuffed into natural casings and hung to dry in the cold barn air. When the workday ended, families gathered around open hearths and tossed those brats into sizzling pans of lard or beer. The snap of the sausage skin, the hiss of the fat, it was the music of home. Served with a thick slice of coarse rye bread, still warm from the oven, and a spoonful of sharp mustard, it wasn't fancy, but it was rich, filling, and tasted like the comfort of Germany reborn on American soil. Each bite carried pride, proof that even far from the Rhine, tradition could survive the wilderness. And in a way, every brat sizzling on a Wisconsin grill today still whispers that story. 3. Cabbage rolls filled with pork and rice in light vinegar sauce. In frontier Wisconsin, cabbage wasn't just a vegetable, it was a survival plan. It grew easily, lasted through frost, and kept families fed when supplies ran low. Out of this humble crop came one of the most beloved comfort meals German immigrants ever made. Cabbage rolls stuffed with pork, rice, and love. Picture a kitchen in 1857, smoke curling from a wood stove, a mother softening cabbage leaves in boiling water, then wrapping each one around a handful of ground pork mixed with leftover rice. The rolls were tucked snugly into an iron pot, bathed in a light vinegar broth, and left to simmer slow and steady. When served, the scent filled the cabin, tangy, rich, and homey all at once. That vinegar sauce wasn't just for taste, it preserved the dish for days, a vital trick before refrigeration. Each tender roll told a story, of resourcefulness, of stretching ingredients, of turning scarcity into flavor. Even now, when you bite into a warm cabbage roll, you're tasting the heart of Wisconsin's immigrant kitchen. 4. Trout pan-fried in butter and herbs with steamed potatoes. Not every German immigrant could afford pork or beef, but Wisconsin's rivers, clear, cold, and alive with trout, offered something just as precious, a fresh catch for the day's meal. Early settlers learned to cast lines before dawn, often with homemade hooks fashioned from bent nails, and by supper, their cabins filled with the scent of sizzling butter and wild herbs. In those days, butter was gold, churned by hand from the family cow, saved for moments like this. A trout, floured lightly, pan-fried until its skin crisped and its flesh flaked perfectly, was a feast that reminded them of the Rhine back home. Served with simple steamed potatoes and maybe a pinch of dill or parsley, It was proof that Wisconsin's wilderness could feed body and spirit alike. Each golden bite carried a quiet triumph, from foreign soil to familiar flavor. In that moment, far from Europe, dinner once again tasted like home. 5. Potato dumplings with mushroom gravy. For German immigrants in 1850s Wisconsin, potatoes were more than a crop. They were survival in the ground. Every fall, families dug them up by hand, storing them in cool cellars to last through winter. Out of those burlap sacks came one of their most beloved dishes, potato dumplings or Kartoffelklöße. Mothers grated boiled potatoes, mixed them with flour and egg, and rolled them into soft pale balls. They were dropped into boiling water, where they floated like little promises of comfort. When they rose to the surface, steaming and tender, they were served with mushroom gravy, made from foraged forest mushrooms, browned onions, and a touch of cream from the morning's milk. It was earthy, rich, and deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that warmed a person from the inside out. For settlers facing brutal winters, this wasn't luxury. It was love disguised as food. Every dumpling was proof that with patience and care, even the simplest ingredients could taste like home. 6. Sauerbraten with red cabbage and spitzel. When a family in 1850s Wisconsin served Sauerbraten, it meant something special. Maybe a wedding, a harvest feast, or the return of a son from working the lumber camps. Beef was precious, often reserved for Sundays or celebrations, so when it appeared on the table every bite mattered. The meat was marinated for days in vinegar, onions, and spices, a trick brought straight from the Rhineland to make tough frontier beef tender and flavorful. As it slow roasted in a heavy iron pot, the cabin filled with a deep, tangy aroma that could pull neighbors in from the snow. Beside it sat red cabbage sweetened with apples and simmered until soft, and spitzel. Hand-scraped noodles boiled fresh that morning. It was a meal that spoke of patience, pride, and tradition. For settlers who worked sunup to sundown, Sauerbraten was more than food. It was a reminder that hard work could still end with grace, and that even on the far edge of America, they hadn't lost their taste for celebration. 7. Beer-braised pork shank with boiled carrots and parsnips. If Sauerbraten was the Sunday feast, beer-braised pork shank was the working man's reward. In 1850s Wisconsin, where German brewers were already perfecting their lagers in cool cellars, beer wasn't just for drinking, it was for cooking. Settlers discovered that a cheap cut, like pork shank, could become tender and rich if simmered low and slow in a pot of homemade brew. Picture the scene, a cast iron pot bubbling gently over a wood fire, the shank turning golden as its marrow melts into the beer, carrots and parsnips soaking up every bit of flavor. The air inside that small cabin filled with the scent of malt, onion, and smoke, the kind of smell that stopped every child in their tracks. By the time the meat fell off the bone, the family gathered, dipping bread into the gravy, laughing, sharing stories. This dish didn't need luxury. It needed patience, heart, and a little German ingenuity. It was humble food with the soul of a feast, the kind that made even a hard day's labor taste like victory. 8. Rye flour flatbread with lard, onions, and fresh herbs. Before the settlers could afford soft loaves or fancy ovens, they baked this, a rustic rye flatbread that crackled at the edges and smelled of smoke and earth. In 1850s Wisconsin, wheat was scarce, but rye thrived in poor cold soil. Every farmhouse had a sack of it, milled coarse and dark. Mothers mixed rye flour with water and a pinch of salt, flattening the dough by hand and sliding it onto hot stones or iron griddles. When it puffed and browned, they brushed it with melted lard, scattered chopped onions on top, and sprinkled what herbs they could find, wild dill, parsley, maybe thyme from the garden. It wasn't bread for show, it was fuel. Simple, fast, and meant to last. Yet even in its roughness it carried warmth and comfort. Eaten fresh off the fire, it paired perfectly with soup, beer, or a long story by the hearth. A meal like this didn't just fill bellies. It reminded every immigrant that even the simplest bread could feel like home. 9. Split pea soup with smoked ham hock and dark bread. When Wisconsin's winter winds howled through the cracks of log cabins, split pea soup was a lifeline. It was thick, hearty, and made from ingredients that didn't spoil: dried peas, onions, carrots, and a leftover ham hock pulled from the smokehouse. For German immigrants, it was the taste of warmth in a land that often felt unforgiving. The process was simple but patient. Dried peas soaked overnight, then simmered all day with that meaty ham bone, releasing salt, smoke, and depth into the bubbling pot. The peas broke down into a golden green stew so thick your spoon could stand upright. On the side sat slices of dark rye bread, dense, nutty, and perfect for mopping up every last drop. This wasn't a meal of luxury, but of endurance. A pot could feed a family for 2 or 3 days, each reheating making it richer. And when you tasted that blend of smoke and sweetness, you didn't just eat, you remembered survival could be delicious. 10. Oven-baked apple strudel served with warm cream. After long days of chopping wood and tending fields, settlers still craved a taste of sweetness, something that reminded them of home. That's where apple strudel came in. It was the dessert that turned hardship into comfort, a dish German immigrants proudly recreated even in the rough kitchens of 1850s Wisconsin. With no fancy ovens, women baked them in cast-iron pans set right over the fire. Thin dough was stretched until almost translucent, brushed with butter, then filled with sliced apples, sugar, and a dusting of cinnamon, a rare spice worth saving for. Rolled tight and baked until golden, it filled the cabin with the smell of orchard and hearth. When served, they drizzled it with warm cream fresh from the morning milking. Sweet, flaky, buttery. It was a small miracle in a hard world. That first bite wasn't just dessert, it was nostalgia, hope, and the simple joy of realizing that even on the frontier, beauty could still come from flour and fruit. 11. Pickled herring with onions on rye and dill garnish. Before refrigeration, the German settlers of Wisconsin relied on salt, vinegar, and thyme to keep food alive, and no dish proved their skill quite like pickled herring. For families from northern Germany or along the Baltic coast, herring wasn't just food, it was a memory of the sea. Barrels of salted fish made their way inland by wagon, and once opened, the settlers transformed them. They soaked the fillets, marinated them in vinegar, onions, sugar, and spices, and let them rest for days until the sharp bite mellowed into something savory and bright. When served on coarse rye bread with a few sprigs of dill, it was both practical and elegant, the kind of meal that didn't need heat, just patience. It might sound simple today, but back then, a slice of pickled herring on rye was a taste of survival mixed with pride. It reminded these immigrants that even hundreds of miles from the ocean, they could still bring a bit of home to the Wisconsin woods. 12. Whole roasted goose stuffed with apples and sage. When the snow began to fall and Christmas candles flickered in cabin windows, nothing said celebration like the smell of a goose roasting over the hearth. For German immigrants in 1850s Wisconsin, the goose was more than a meal. It was tradition carried across the Atlantic, a centerpiece that turned even the roughest frontier home into a holiday feast. Families would raise a few geese through summer, fatten them on grain, and choose one special bird for winter. Stuffed with chopped apples, onions, and sage, the goose roasted slowly in an iron oven, basting itself in its own golden fat. The crackle of the skin, the sweetness of the apples, the perfume of sage. It was pure comfort in a frozen world. When served with red cabbage and potatoes, the table went quiet for a moment. That sacred pause before gratitude. For settlers who had so little, this wasn't just food. It was proof that joy could still find its way to the frontier. 13. Steamed white cabbage with bacon and caraway seeds. Cabbage was the unsung hero of every immigrant's table. Cheap, hardy, and versatile, it could last months in a root cellar. A true lifeline through Wisconsin's long winters. But the Germans had a secret for turning that humble vegetable into something deeply satisfying. Bacon and caraway. In a small cabin kitchen, a skillet sizzled with chopped bacon, the aroma cutting through the cold air. Shredded cabbage went in next, hissing as it hit the hot fat, softening slowly into a glossy, fragrant tangle. A pinch of salt, a splash of vinegar, and just a few caraway seeds gave it that unmistakable old-world flavor. Slightly sweet, slightly nutty, and comforting to the bone. This wasn't a side dish, it was a small miracle made from scraps. Settlers served it beside sausage or potatoes, but it could just as easily stand alone. It was the kind of meal that made even the toughest homesteader stop, breathe, and feel grateful for the simple blessings that kept them going. 14. Veal schnitzel with lemon slice and potato salad. When a family on the Wisconsin frontier served veal schnitzel, you knew something worth celebrating had happened. A new baby, a good harvest, or the first thaw after a long bitter winter. Veal was rare and expensive, but German settlers knew exactly how to make it stretch into something unforgettable. Thin slices of tender meat were pounded flat with the back of a knife, dusted in flour, dipped in egg, and coated with breadcrumbs made from stale rye bread. Then came the magic, sizzling in a cast-iron pan with bubbling lard until the edges crisped golden and the aroma filled the cabin, served with a squeeze of lemon and a scoop of warm potato salad dressed in vinegar and bacon drippings. It was more than a meal. It was pride on a plate. For families who worked sunup to sundown, this was their reminder that life could still be delicate, flavorful, and worth savoring. Even today, that crunch of schnitzel still carries the echo of those early kitchens, where struggle met celebration and every bite told a story of triumph. 15. Rye beer-braised sausage and sauerkraut casserole. If there was one dish that summed up the German heart of Wisconsin, this was it. Sausage, sauerkraut, and rye beer, all bubbling together in one glorious pot. It was hearty, simple, and built to feed a family after a full day of plowing fields or chopping timber. Every household had their own version. Thick Bratwurst or knackwurst browned in a skillet, layered with tangy sauerkraut, onions, and sliced apples for a touch of sweetness. Then came the secret, a generous pour of rye beer from a local brewer's barrel. The pot simmered low, filling the cabin with that unmistakable scent of malt, spice, and smoke. By evening, the sausages were tender, the kraut mellow, the flavors bound together in pure comfort. Served with a hunk of coarse bread, it wasn't just a meal, it was a ritual, a taste of both the old world and the new one they were building. This was Wisconsin before cheese curds and Friday fish fries, a land shaped by beer, pork, and the stubborn will to make something beautiful out of hardship. 16. Buckwheat pancakes with jam and stewed plums. Early mornings on the Wisconsin frontier were cold, dark, and quiet, but the smell of buckwheat pancakes could wake a whole family. German immigrants brought buckwheat seeds from home, planting them in the rocky soil that other crops refused to touch. The result was a nutty, hearty flour that became the base for one of the simplest, most comforting meals. Mothers mixed the batter by hand, buckwheat, milk, and a touch of molasses for sweetness, then poured it onto hot griddles greased with pork fat. The edges crisped as steam rose, and soon stacks of brown, fluffy pancakes filled the table. On top went homemade jam or stewed plums, simmered slowly from last summer's harvest and sealed in glass jars for winter. Each bite carried the taste of resourcefulness, rustic, sweet, and strong. It wasn't breakfast as much as a promise. We're still here, still making something good from what little we have. For settlers far from home, those warm pancakes and plums were more than food. They were hope served hot on a cold morning. 17. Creamed spinach and dumplings in a light onion sauce. Not every meal on the frontier was meat and potatoes. When Lent came, or when money ran thin, German immigrants turned to the land, and the land provided. Spinach, sorrel, and wild greens grew easily along Wisconsin's riverbanks, and from them came a humble but nourishing dish, creamed spinach with dumplings. Women would gather fresh greens at dawn, rinse them in cold creek water, and chop them fine. In the kitchen, onions sizzled in butter before the greens went in, softening into a deep, earthy fragrance. A splash of milk thickened with flour turned it creamy, rich, and satisfying. Alongside, soft dumplings, made from eggs, flour, and a pinch of salt, boiled until tender and light, soaking up the onion sauce like sponges. Together, it was a meal that tasted far richer than its ingredients. For many families, this was proof that comfort didn't come from wealth. It came from knowing how to turn greens and grain into something that felt like love on a plate. 18. Honey-glazed ham with boiled beets and green beans. On a Wisconsin farm in the 1850s, few sights were more beautiful than a glazed ham coming out of a wood-fired oven. Honey was precious, gathered from wild hives or bartered from a neighbor, so when it touched the table, it meant celebration. German settlers used it sparingly, blending it with mustard or vinegar to glaze a salt-cured ham until its surface shimmered like amber. The smell alone could stop a day's work. The fat sizzled, the honey caramelized, and every corner of the cabin filled with sweetness and smoke. Alongside came boiled beets, earthy and red as the soil itself, and crisp green beans simmered in butter and a pinch of salt. Together, they painted a plate as colorful as a summer garden. This was no ordinary meal. It was Sunday pride, the kind you served to guests or neighbors who helped raise your barn. For a few quiet minutes, everyone ate slowly, grateful for flavor, family, and the rare sweetness that reminded them how far they'd come from the old country. 19. smoked fish chowder with onions and potatoes in rye broth. Before there were grocery stores or canned goods, dinner came from what you could catch. And for Wisconsin's German immigrants, that meant fish. The lakes and rivers were full of perch, pike, and trout, which the settlers smoked to make last through the cold months. Out of those smoky fillets came a dish that felt both rustic and rich, fish chowder made in a rye-based broth. Onions and diced potatoes simmered first, softening in a pot of water thickened with a few spoonfuls of ground rye, a clever trick that added body and flavor when flour was scarce. Then the smoked fish went in, releasing its scent into the bubbling stew until the whole cabin smelled of wood smoke and comfort. Served with a hunk of dark bread, it was the taste of resilience, the kind of meal that used everything, wasted nothing, and kept families fed no matter the weather. In every spoonful was the story of survival, a simple lake fish turned into warmth, memory, and home. 20. Lentil stew with smoked sausage and coarse ground mustard. If there was one dish that truly defined German thrift, it was lentil stew. The settlers in 1850s Wisconsin knew how to stretch a penny, and a pot of lentils could feed a family for days. Packed with protein, easy to store, and endlessly adaptable, lentils became the quiet hero of the immigrant kitchen. A ham bone or smoked sausage gave it depth, onions and carrots added sweetness, and a dollop of coarse mustard stirred in before serving gave it bite. The stew simmered slowly all afternoon, thickening until it clung to the spoon, a perfect meal for those long cold evenings when the wind howled outside and the fire was your only light. Served with rye bread and a mug of beer, it tasted like comfort and endurance in equal measure. Each spoonful was smoky, hearty, and honest. The kind of food that didn't just fill you up but reminded you what survival really tasted like. And long after the bowls were empty, that smell of lentils and smoke lingered, the scent of resilience, built one humble meal at a time. 21. Pumpernickel breadcrumb, pudding with raisins and butter. When nothing went to waste, even stale bread had a second life. And in German immigrant kitchens, that life was sweet. Pumpernickel, dark and dense, might start as breakfast bread, but by week's end it became dessert. Settlers in 1850s Wisconsin turned every crumb into something rich and comforting. Warm breadcrumb pudding with raisins and butter. They crumbled leftover bread into a bowl, soaked it in milk and eggs, then folded in sugar, cinnamon, and a handful of raisins. Dried fruit often saved for special occasions. Baked slowly in an iron pan, the pudding puffed up golden at the edges, its scent filling the whole cabin. When served, it was drizzled with melted butter or a splash of cream from the family cow. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. A reminder that frugality could still taste like luxury. Around that small wooden table, families didn't see waste. They saw creativity, gratitude, and the sweet reward of making something out of almost nothing. 22. Buttermilk rye bread soup with chopped onions and ham bits. Few dishes capture the spirit of old-world frugality like rye bread soup. Born from the belief that nothing should be thrown away, this humble meal was a staple in 1850s Wisconsin, especially during lean months when cupboards ran bare. When yesterday's bread turned hard as stone, settlers didn't toss it, they transformed it. Chunks of stale rye were torn into pieces and soaked in warm buttermilk until soft. Into the pot went browned onions, a pinch of salt, and bits of leftover ham or smoked fatback for flavor. The mixture simmered low and slow, thickening into a hearty, tangy porridge that filled the air with a cozy, sour-sweet aroma. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genius. Every spoonful was warm, comforting, and full of the deep, rustic taste of rye. Families ate it by the fire, grateful that even the scraps could sustain them. In a world where nothing came easy, this simple bread soup was more than food. It was proof that survival could still taste like care. 23. Dill-pickled cucumbers with sour cream and rye toast. When the summer sun beat down on Wisconsin farms, German immigrants turned to one of their oldest traditions, pickling. Cucumbers grew wild and fast in the Midwest soil, and before long, barrels of brine and dill filled every cellar. These pickles weren't just a snack, they were a promise that flavor would survive the long winter ahead. To serve them fresh, settlers sliced crisp cucumbers thin, mixed them with chopped dill, vinegar, salt, and a spoonful of sugar, then let them sit until the tang mellowed. When mealtime came, they were spooned cold into bowls and topped with a dollop of sour cream. Cool, creamy, and bright. Eaten with a slice of toasted rye, it was the perfect balance. sharp, smooth, and deeply satisfying. On hot afternoons after work in the fields, this simple dish felt like a gift. It wasn't grand, but it was refreshing, familiar, and alive. A reminder that even in a new world, old world comfort could still come from a humble cucumber and a little bit of patience. 24. Fried perch from Wisconsin lakes with lemon butter and boiled new potatoes. For German settlers in 1850s, Wisconsin, the lakes were both larder and lifeline. Perch, pike, and bluegill shimmered beneath the clear water, waiting for a line and a little luck. When a family caught a few perch, it was a good day. Not just for dinner, but for morale. The fish were cleaned on the riverbank, dredged in flour and salt, and fried in bubbling butter until golden and crisp. The smell drifted across the yard, calling everyone home. Fresh lemon, if they could get it from town, was a rare luxury, squeezed sparingly over the fish for a bright, tangy finish. Alongside, new potatoes boiled in salted water until tender completed the meal. It was simple, pure, and perfect. A feast made from what the land freely gave. The first bite was always quiet, reverent even, as if everyone understood how lucky they were to taste something fresh and clean in a hard world. That golden perch wasn't just dinner, it was proof that Wisconsin itself could feed both body and soul. 25. Sweet yeast dough rolls with caraway seeds and cinnamon butter. Every German immigrant kitchen had one treasured scent, fresh bread rising by the fire. But on Sundays or special occasions, they took that comfort one step further. Soft, sweet yeast rolls brushed with butter, speckled with caraway, and served warm with cinnamon sugar. The dough started humbly: flour, yeast, milk, and a little honey or molasses, mixed by hand in a wooden bowl. It rose slowly under a cloth while the family worked, then baked until golden brown, their crusts crackling softly in the hearth oven. Caraway seeds added that unmistakable old-world aroma, warm, nutty, a whisper of home across an ocean. When served, each roll was spread with cinnamon butter melting into every fold. It was a rare sweetness, the kind saved for holidays, births, or simply to celebrate making it through another harsh season. For those settlers, it wasn't just bread, it was joy, memory, and hope, baked fresh in the heart of a new world that was slowly starting to feel like home. When we think of Wisconsin today, we picture cheese curds, brat stands, and backyard barbecues. But behind every flavor is a story, one written by German hands in cabins of pine, by families who worked the land, brewed the beer, and built their lives one meal at a time. These 25 foods weren't just recipes, they were survival, faith, and love disguised as dinner. Every pot of sauerkraut, every loaf of rye, every sausage sizzling in beer carried the same message. We may be far from home, but we can still make it ours. The settlers didn't just feed their families, they shaped an identity. They took the best of the old world, mixed it with the heart of the new, and created the soul of Wisconsin. And if you've ever tasted a brat, a dumpling, or a slice of apple strudel, you've tasted that legacy too.